If you turned on your security camera at 3 a.m. and found yourself silently walking around your house while you were sleeping, what would you do? Delete the video? Leave? Or keep watching and wait until it looked straight into the lens? In this story, a man is haunted by his own self, or rather, a blurred, eyeless, soulless version of himself that is slowly replacing him. But what's more terrifying is not that he exists, but that he's learning to live like you. In the spring of 2019, I moved out on my own for the first time. After nearly 3 years of sharing a roommate, I had saved enough money to rent a small house of my own. I didn't have any special requirements, just enough quiet to rest after my night shift and some privacy to start over after a failed relationship. I found this house on a rental website. It was on the edge of town, about a 20-minute drive from the center, in an old, deserted neighborhood, not too modern, but the rent was very reasonable. The house was only 1 story, painted yellowish white, with an old tiled roof, and had a small yard in the back with sparse grass. The only thing that bothered me was the basement. From the moment I first walked in to see the house, I had a strange feeling about the basement door on the small hallway that led behind the kitchen. It was larger than usual, made of dark wood, with an old metal handle. When I asked the landlord, a middle-aged man who seemed rather absent-minded, he just shrugged and said it was just an old basement for storage. Nothing to worry about. You can use it to store boxes and stuff. It's just a little damp and dark, he said, his voice flat as if he wanted to change the subject as quickly as possible. I'm not superstitious, and at that point, the need to rent a house overrode any vague premonitions. I signed the lease and moved in early April. The first day we moved in, it was raining lightly. The air was cold and damp, making the old doors in the house difficult to open. I struggled to arrange things until late afternoon, and when I opened the basement door for the first time, I almost withdrew my hand as a wave of cold air rushed up. Not the cold of the weather, but a quiet, invisible cold, as if something had been sleeping down there for a long time. I turned on the light, or tried to. The light switch was about halfway down the basement stairs, meaning you had to climb the first few steps in the dark before you could reach it. As I made my way down, the dim light from the pale yellow bulb barely illuminated a few feet around me. The ceiling was low, the walls were rough brick, and the smell of dampness was immediate. There were some old wooden shelves covered in cobwebs, and some moldy cardboard boxes I didn't dare open. I was there for less than a minute before I decided not to go down. Not because I was afraid, I told myself, but because it was unnecessary. I had nothing to put down there, and the feeling of standing alone in such a small, dark, cold space made me feel uneasy. I closed the basement door. The knob clicked as I turned the lock. That was it, I thought. Just another part of the house. Nothing special. But that night, as I lay reading in the living room, a strange feeling crept over me, as if something were quietly there beneath the floorboards I was treading on. A silent presence, no sound, no movement, just a vague sense that I was not entirely alone. I tried to reason it out logically. This house was old. There must be the sound of wind whistling through the cracks in the door, the rattle of water pipes, or the sound of wood expanding and contracting due to changes in temperature. I had lived in many places, and old houses always had their own sounds. But this time the feeling was different. It didn't come from the sounds, but from an uneasiness in my heart, as if I was being observed. The next day, I called the landlord and asked if the basement had ever flooded or had any problems. He was silent for a few seconds and then said, "No, it's nothing. I lived there for 3 years and had no problems. Don't worry about it." The answer made me feel a little better. But from that moment on, I started paying more attention to the basement. Even though I had no intention of going down there, I walked past it every day, and every time I did, I glanced at the doorknob, just to make sure it was still closed. 3 days after moving in, I started hearing noises. At first, I thought it was the old house, the wooden floors, the plumbing, or the wind blowing through the loose roof tiles. At first it was just a slight clicking sound, like someone tapping their fingers against the living room window or the back of the sofa. The noise was irregular, but clear enough to make me take off my headphones and turn my head to look. Nothing, just the sound of drizzle outside. On Wednesday night, I was up late working remotely, editing papers for a research project. Around 3 a.m., when everything was completely quiet, I heard it again, knock. This time clearer. 3 words. Knock, knock, knock. I left my desk and walked down the hall toward the kitchen, where the basement door was. I stopped dead in my tracks when I realized the sound came from behind that door. 3 sounds. Clear. Not wind, not water pipes. Knocking purposeful. I stood there for a minute, waiting for a repeat, but everything was silent. I bit my lip and turned the knob. The door was locked as tightly as I had locked it that afternoon. I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat. Maybe I'm imagining it, I told myself. But the next night, at exactly 3 a.m., the knocking came again. This time it's 4 hours. Knock, 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 knock. I sat bolt upright in bed, clutching my phone. No messages, no notifications. I tiptoed out of the room, turning on the hallway light. The basement door was still closed, but I could feel its presence somewhere behind. I dare not open the door. The next day, I bought a small camera to put in the hallway. A motion camera. If there is any activity at night, it will record it. That night, I went to bed early. I tried to clear my mind, but in reality, I was just waiting for the sound to confirm everything I felt. And at exactly 3:02 a.m., the knock came again. This time it was 5 hours. Knock, 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 knock. But when I opened my phone to look at the camera, nothing, no movement. No sound, no recording, just me, and something was knocking on the other side of the basement door. I started sleeping poorly. I kept the night light on every night, and set the alarm for 2:59 a.m. I wanted to check yourself before the knock comes. The 8th night, I woke up at 2:58. I quietly got up, walked out of the room, and stood in front of the basement door. I pressed my ear to the wood. A minute passed, nothing happened. I almost thought nothing would happen this time. Then, cluck, a single sound, but right next to my ear. Through the thick wood, it made my skin crawl. I recoiled. The feeling was clear. Someone is standing on the other side of the door. Pressed his palm against the inside of the door, and knocked once, as if in response to me. I called the landlord the next morning. "What do you hear?" he asked. Confused. I heard knocking, very regular, in the middle of the night, from the basement. He was silent. After a while, he replied, "It could just be the noise of the house. No one has ever complained before." "I know you're lying." The way you responded wasn't surprised. It was the defensiveness of someone. Heard this before. That night, I mustered up my courage. I sat on a chair facing the basement door, carrying a phone to record. I placed the clock in front of me, watching the minute hands slowly tick away. 2:58. I start recording. 3:01. Nothing happens. 3:03. I almost thought there would be nothing today then. Knock, knock, knock. I held my breath, but this time, it didn't stop there. Swish. Door handle shakes slightly. I stood up. My heart stopped. No wind, no shaking, no one else in the house but me. But something was grabbing the handle from inside the basement. Since the night the doorknob shook, I no longer dared to go near the basement alone. Even though it was daytime and the lights were on, I avoided walking down that hallway. I moved my belongings into the living room and set up a folding bed there so I wouldn't have to go near the cellar door. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I am being watched. Not from the window, not from the street, but from inside the house. More specifically, from behind the basement door. I started having strange dreams. In the dream, I was standing in front of that door. In the dark, everything around me was strangely quiet. I reached up to touch the doorknob. It was cold. And when I bent down and put my ear to the door, I heard breath. Not a breeze, not a faint whistle. Butuman breath. Panting. So panting that it was like his throat was constricted, but still trying to take each breath like a trapped creature. I woke up with a start, covered in sweat, my heart beating so fast I thought I was going to have a panic attack. And then, I started listening, that breath while awake. That night, the weather was hot, even though there was no sun. The air in the house was thick. I opened all the windows, but it was still stuffy. I don't know what prompted me, but I stood up, walked out into the hallway, and stopped in front of the basement door. I did nothing, just stood there, in silence. And then I hear it, a soft sigh, long and wet, as clear as someone is standing on the other side of the door. Turned to face me. I held my breath. That breath continues, steady, persistent, and heavy. No footsteps. No movement, just a presence standing still. Breathing in, breathing out. I turned my head to look at the camera in the hallway. The light was still on. Recording. I pulled out my phone and opened the app to see the live feed from the camera. The screen appears empty. No one behind me, no shadow in front of the basement door. But he's still here breathing right next to the ear. At that moment, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Breathing is in sync with me. When I inhale, it inhales. When I hold my breath, it stops breathing. As if it is learning to be me. I stepped back, my hands shaking. A shiver ran down my spine as I turned my head and almost saw my shadow, looking back from inside the door. No, not the reflection. It's the feeling that something like me was imitating, was watching my every move from the other side of the wooden wall. I rushed into the living room, slammed the door, and sat down next to the cot, holding my head. I can't stay here any longer. The next morning, I called an acquaintance, Linda, who works at a magazine that specializes in haunted houses. I met her at a writing workshop last year. "You hear breathing?" Linda asked, her voice more serious than I expected. "I don't just hear it. I feel it. It reacts to me." Linda was silent for a few seconds. Then she said something that made me shiver. "That's not the first time I've heard such a story." I asked again. Linda said that a few years ago, someone had rented the house. A college student. After 3 weeks of living there, he developed severe sleep disturbances, paranoia, and a constant feeling that someone was living in the basement. He left in the night, leaving all his belongings behind. The house remained labeled, in need of repair, for nearly a year afterward. Before the owner relisted it as a long-term, discounted rental. That night, I decided to leave. I sat down one last time in front of the basement door. No more trying to be brave, just to try to understand. I put my ear to the wood again. And as always, the breathing begins again. But this time, I'm not afraid. I whispered, "I don't know who you are, or what happened, but I can't live with this fear anymore." I don't expect an answer. But what I heard was a whisper as soft as the wind. "Don't leave me." I opened my eyes wide and stood up. My hands were shaking. I stared at the door for a long time. Then I turned, walked to the front door, locked the house, and left forever. After the night I heard whispers through the basement door, I knew I couldn't live alone in that silence any longer. I needed a witness, an explanation, or at least, someone else to confirm that I wasn't crazy. The next morning, I called the landlord. "I want you to check the basement," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Something isn't right down there." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. Then he replied briefly, "What did you hear?" I hesitated. If I said I heard breathing or whispering, he might laugh or think I was hallucinating. I simply said, "There were noises, at night, like someone knocking on the door, and footsteps." This time he sighed. "I lived there 4 years. Old house. It makes noise at night. Especially in the spring. The floors swell. The plumbing squeals. Rats running under the roof. Nothing. So can you come check?" I asked again. He hesitated a moment, then agreed. "I'll come this afternoon." About 3 o'clock he arrived. A man in his 50s. Slightly stooped, wearing a cloth cap and worn shoes. He looked more like a carpenter than a landlord. I led him into the hallway, pointing to the basement door. "I locked it all the way back yesterday," I said, "but the noise keeps coming. Right at 3 a.m. every night." He said nothing. He just bent down and turned the handle. The lock was secure. He took out his key and pushed the door open. Cold air immediately rushed up from the basement. I almost shivered at the familiar feeling. He turned on the flashlight on his phone, then began to walk down the steps. "I'm coming," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. The basement loomed dimly in the light. There were the same old wooden shelves, the torn cardboard boxes. The musty smell was stronger. But nothing unusual, no signs of habitation, no footprints, no moving objects. "See?" he said, his voice light. "Nothing." I walked slowly around the corners, even turned over a few boxes with my hands. Trash, old books, moldy wires, nothing to fear, no people, no place to hide. I asked, "Have you ever heard anything while you were living here?" He hesitated. "No, but I'm not alone." That statement made me pause. "What do you mean?" "My wife lives with me. She died a few years ago," he said, bending down as if searching for something on the floor. Maybe I didn't notice. Women, they're more sensitive. He muttered the last sentence as if talking to himself. After about 15 minutes of checking, we went back up. He locked the door, carefully inserted the key, then turned to me. "If you're still worried, I can call a plumber to check for water damage or rats. But I don't think it's anything serious. You're just stressed." I thanked him, though I did not feel relieved at all. As he left, I stood watching through the window. His old pickup truck slowly turned onto the road. For a split second, I had the feeling he was looking longingly in the rearview mirror. As if he knew I would still be uneasy after that inspection. That night, I did not sleep. I sat on the sofa, hugging my knees tightly, staring at the hallway leading to the basement. 2:55 a.m. 2:59 a.m. I closed my eyes. For the first time in many nights, I didn't want to hear anything. 3:01 a.m. Knock, knock, knock. 3 hours. Not fast, not slow. And then, a long, drawn-out sigh sounded from behind the door. "There's no one down there." I know. The landlord checked. I checked. But the sound is still there. And I suddenly understood the scariest thing of all. The thing making the noise doesn't need to be physically present. It's not a mouse. It's not a pipe. It doesn't need footprints. It doesn't need a shadow. It's part of the house. Or is the house. I took down the hallway camera the next day. Not because I don't want to write anymore, but because I know nothing will come up. The scariest thing is not what you see. It's what you don't see. Know for sure it's there, even if no one but you can feel it. I can't remember the last time I had a good night's sleep. After the futile check with the landlord, my unease did not subside. On the contrary, it became as simmering as a fever. Now, I not only felt breath good knock, but also presaged that something was about to happen. Something I couldn't stop. That night, the wind suddenly picked up. The wind was so strong that the windows rattled. I pulled myself under the covers, trying not to think about the basement, not to think about the familiar sounds. 2:58 a.m. I opened my eyes, not because of the alarm, but because of noisitude from the hallway. Failed. The sound of a lock. Not just any lock, but a swivel lock. The wooden peg bounced lightly like someone from inside is opening the door. I sat up, my limbs cold. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of the wind whistling through the window. I stood up and walked quietly out into the hallway. I had just turned the corner when cold wind blew across my face. And I saw the basement door is open. No one there, no footprints, no footsteps. Just the door is open, as if inviting. I didn't dare go near it, didn't dare close it. I just stood there, staring into the pitch blackness at the foot of the stairs. Even with the hallway light on, the darkness in the basement was thick. It swallowed up all the light. I stepped back. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I went back into the room, shut the door, and propped the desk against the doorknob. But I can't sleep. The next morning, I checked the basement door handle. The wooden latch had slipped to one side. Apparently has been opened by force. No wind can do that. And I'm sure I can too. Locked it before bed. I went to buy a new lock. A sturdy one with a combination. I replaced the old one. Tried locking it over and over again to make sure. That afternoon, I also poured white salt into a bowl. Circle around basement door, not because of superstition, but because I need to feel like I belong doing something to defend yourself. But at night, everything repeats itself, only this time, faster. 2:56 a.m. Fail. No more waiting for 3 o'clock. No more hesitation. The sound of a lock turning. Then a long creak. I rushed into the living room. Basement door is wide open. The salt circle was disturbed. The section broken. Cold wind from the basement rushed up fiercely, accompanied by a smell. Musty mixed with metallic smell, like old blood. I looked down the stairs. It was still dark. There was no movement, but I knew, it is there. I shouted, "I know you're down there. What do you want?" No one answered. Only breath, slowly, clearly. This time, on the first step. It has arrived. I don't remember exactly how I closed the door after that. I only remember blocking it with a chair, then sitting huddled in the corner until morning. The next morning, I called a feng shui master recommended by a friend. Not because I believed him, but because I was desperate. He arrived, looked around the house, and then stopped for a long time in front of the basement door. Do you know, if a dead person is locked in one place for too long, they might forget they are dead? I was speechless. He continued, if every night, that soul is called by a knock, each knock is a step back to the earthly world. I asked, so what should I do now? He just said one sentence, you must no door anymore. At any cost. I changed the locks again. I added an alarm, and that night, I sat in my room, hugging my pillow, my eyes glued to the camera on my phone. 2:59 a.m. 3 o'clock. Nothing happened. 3:02. Click. I jumped. Camera is blurry. Screen flickers. Already, frame disappears. I ran out. The basement door, still closed but the lock opened. No one inside. No one outside. Just me, and one increasingly clear truth. What's in the basement doesn't need you to open the door. It just needs you to be afraid. I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe it was because I was exhausted from so many sleepless nights. Or maybe I was so sure that the new locks and alarm would be enough to keep everything in the basement. But I was wrong. I dreamed. In my dream, I was standing in the hallway again. In the middle of the night. No lights. No wind. Nothing but me, and the basement door is wide open. The darkness from the basement was like liquid, thick and silent. I heard no knocking, no breathing. Everything was completely silent. I approached the door, my dream heart still pounding. And then something rose from the darkness. At first it was just a pale hand. Long and black nails, silently grasped the ladder. Then an arm, then a shoulder, then a head, and I see myself, me. One version just like me. From the figure, the face, the hair, but the eyes were different. Lifeless, no emotion, just two empty pits, as black as the night behind. It crawled upstairs, without haste, without concealment, just like that, slowly walked out of the basement, and stand opposite me. I took a step back. It took a step forward. I gasped. It gasped too. I shouted, "Who are you?" It smiled, a crooked smile. Then it spoke, my voice, but it was choked. "I am the part you hide down there." I backed away. It moved forward. "I am all your sleepless nights. I am the loneliness, the obsession, the fear you never dare to look straight at." It raised its hand, a hand just like mine, but with long black nails, and touched my chest lightly. And I feel cold in my chest, as if it just touched my heart, then squeezed gently. "I learned to breathe like you, walk like you, and soon," it whispered, "I will live for you." I screamed in my dream, falling backwards, but instead of falling to the ground, I fell into an empty, dark, endless space, and woke up. I sat up, drenched in sweat. The room was still dark, but the alarm didn't ring. The door was still closed. Everything was the same. I gasped, rushed out of the room, and ran to the basement door. The lock is still there. There are no signs of it being opened. But when I bent down to the floor, have footprints. Two wet footprints, exactly like mine, were clearly imprinted on the tile floor. One came from the basement. The other went toward my room. I gasped. I looked at the camera. The screen went black. I turned around and ran back to my room. But when I pushed the door open, I stopped. There is someone lying on my bed, covered with blanket. Body looks exactly like me. I walked slowly in, my heart pounding. I approached the bed and touched the man's shoulder. And it comes back. It was me, eyes lifeless, mouth curved into a smile, whispering, "I told you, I'm learning to live like you." I screamed and backed away, hitting the table, falling to the ground, awake again. This time, I really awake. The sun was just up, shining through the curtains. The alarm was still on. The cameras were working. The house was quiet. I sat up and put my hands to my face. My skin was cold. My eyes were tired. My heart was still racing. I went out into the hallway. The basement door remains closed. I turned on the hallway light. Checked the floor. No footprints. Nothing. Just one dream. But I do not believe. I went back to the room. Walked in. Looked at my bed. And this time, it was empty. No one in bed. No clones. No laughter. But the mirror hanging next to it reflected another image. I looked in the mirror. But what looked back didn't blink. After the dream of a clone of myself emerging from the basement, I started to feel not like myself anymore. Every morning I wake up, I ask myself, who am I? The seemingly philosophical question suddenly became shockingly practical. I began to doubt all of my actions. The cup of coffee I don't remember making. The jacket hung neatly even though I left it lying around last night. And the basement alarm, which occasionally goes off for no reason. I needed proof, something irrefutable, so I installed 2 new cameras, one right in front of the basement door, one across the hall in the living room. Every day, I reviewed the footage, rewinding it frame by frame at 3 a.m. For the first 4 days, nothing unusual, but on the 5th night, I saw it. 3:02 a.m. Hallway camera records images. One person came out of my bedroom. The man was wearing a gray t-shirt and dark pants, the clothes I wore that night. But I'm sleeping. The man was in no hurry. He walked through the living room, walked lightly toward the basement door, and stopped right in front of the camera, and looked up and straight into the lens. The angle of his face is me face but blurry, fuzzy, indistinct as if from a faulty print. I rewind. The second time, I noticed something more terrifying. He doesn't go by normal way. His feet did not lift off the ground, slipwalk, as if the legs were weightless. And when he looked straight into the camera, hello. I closed my laptop, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to believe it was a recording error, shadows, frame loops, or lighting effects. But deep down, I know, thought not a technical error. Because right after he disappeared, the camera started shake slightly, then fade out, until the signal is lost for 30 seconds. When the signal returned, the basement door was ajar. I did lock it before going to bed. I remember clearly. The next morning, I sent the video to Linda, the journalist friend I had been in contact with. She called back after 10 minutes. Her voice was tense. That person looks so much like you. I swallowed. I wasn't sleepwalking, I swear. Linda was silent, then said softly, "Do you remember the story I told you about the student who lived there?" That man, in his last days, began to say that he's yourself walking around the house, doing things he doesn't remember doing. I stiffened. Linda continued, "He also installed a camera, and also saw the copy. Not clear, no eyes." I gasped. And then, he disappeared one night. The basement door was open, but no one saw him again. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in front of the monitor, watching all 3 cameras, flashlight in hand, phone ready with emergency number. 2:58 a.m., 2:59, 3 o'clock. I held my breath. 3:01, living room screen flicker. And then here appear. This time not from the bedroom, but from, in the wall as if he go through it. He stood in the middle of the living room. His head tilted slightly. His eyes were blurry, but I knew he was looking at me through the lens. I stood up, trembling, and then, "Here is your hand. Right hand, just like me." And he touched camera. Signal lost. The screen is black. I rushed to the living room, but see nothing. There was only darkness, and breath so close that I thought someone was whisper in ear. I turned around. No one, but the bedroom sensor light up. Someone is in the room. I rushed in. Empty. Only the wall mirror remained. And in the mirror, he was looking at me from behind. I turned back. No one, but on the table, have a piece of paper. The handwriting is scribbled, but it's mine. "You're asleep. Now it's my turn." The day I disappeared, no one knew. There was no sign of forced entry. No screams. No blood or struggle. It was just, I wasn't in that house anymore. The only thing the police found was the last security camera video, a grainy frame at 3:02 a.m. in it. I can be seen, face blank, arms hanging limp, walking out of the bedroom and opening the basement door. I stood there for a few seconds, then slowly go down. No turning back. Bring nothing. There is no one behind. The door slowly closed behind him, and never opened again. People said I was missing. My neighbor said I looked strange lately. My landlord said I called him in the middle of the night asking about sounds under the floor. Linda, the only friend I kept in touch with, came to the house as soon as she heard the news. She didn't dare go down to the basement, but she found a thing in my room, a notebook, scribbled, dense, in which the last 28 days diary mine in that house. The last page says, "If I were not here, I would have gone to a place where no one has ever been before. But if one day you hear a voice calling from within, don't be afraid. Face it, look straight at the part of you that you are denying. Because only when we accept who we are, can the darkness not take us." Linda burst into tears. But she also understand what I mean. A few weeks later, strangely enough, no longer considered missing. One morning, at a provincial meditation center in Dalat, I was found sitting quietly under a pine tree. Eyes closed, face strangely calm. No one knew how I got there. No identification, just old clothes, and a string of wooden beads hanging around my neck. I did back, but not the same me as before. I recounted everything, from the knocking in the night, to the dream about the clone, to the escalating paranoia until the moment I entered that basement, and find yourself. It's not that I'm haunted. It's not that the house has a spirit. It's that I've lived with a version I don't want to admit too long. The basement, the lowest part of the house, is actually just a metaphor for the deepest part of my mind. It's where I hide my painful memories, my unfinished dreams, my unspoken confusions, and when I've been alone for too long, they begin to knock. When I walked down into that basement, I wasn't swallowed up. I dialogue with myself, with the dark and weak part that I used to deny. And thanks to that, I come back, not from any dimension, but from darkness inside. Now, I live a quiet life. I tell this story not to scare or seek pity, but to remind you of one thing. Don't deny your dark side. We all have knocks in the night, fears, hurts, or memories we want to forget. But if you ignore them, they will keep knocking until you have to go down to that basement where you are alone with yourself. And hopefully when that day comes, you'll have the courage not to run away. Brain lessons from this story. The greatest darkness is not in the basement or the camera, but within each person. Facing our weaknesses doesn't break us. It heals us. Loneliness is not as scary as not understanding what you need. Clapperboard if you find this story touching something inside you. Leave a comment below to share your experience. Have you ever had sleepless nights because of an invisible fear? Thumbs up, don't forget like video to support the main character who found himself after a long nightmare. Push pin and subscribe channel so you don't miss new stories, journeys through darkness to find the light. Only on, after 0 hours. Thanks for listening.